The Global Digital Compact provides an opportunity to close the digital divide. It also provides an opportunity for Africa to engage.
The Global Digital Compact should be implemented through a multi-stakeholder process so that everyone, everywhere, can thrive in the age of AI.
Private and public collaboration can help achieve the goals of the Global Digital Compact.
The Global Digital Compact has been a crucial platform for diverse stakeholders like me to come together and shape the future of a digital world that benefits everyone.
To our stage, Abidjan Bouznou.
Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends. Welcome to Action Day, the high-level opening program leading up to 2025 Multi-Stakeholder Forum on Science, Technology, and Innovation for the Sustainable Development Goals. Together with partners from the global digital ecosystem, the United Nations Office for Digital and Emerging Technologies, ODET, is excited to have you with us for a day of dialogue, exchange, and action at the intersection of science, technology, and sustainable development. But first, a moment of housekeeping. If you're having difficulty hearing from back of the room, or if you need translation, please feel free to use the earpiece provided at your seat to access the live audio feed. Before we get started with the high-level opening keynotes, it's my true pleasure to invite to stage Ms. Ayaka Suzuki, Director of the Strategic Planning and Monitoring Unit in the Executive Office of the Secretary General. The EOSG has been a key partner in making today's Action Day possible. Please all join me in giving me a warm round of applause for Ms. Ayaka Suzuki. Ayaka, please welcome.
Thank you, Vishan. Good morning. I think we could do better than that. Let's try again. Good morning. Much better. And thank you so much for braving the rain to get here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Action Day of the 10th Science, Technology, and Innovation Forum. We meet at a moment of disruption, but also of great possibility. The United Nations is stepping up to meet this moment through the Pact for the Future, including the Global Digital Compact, the UN 2.0 Agenda, and the UN 80 Initiative. We can see that in today's Action Day. Together with the forum's co-chairs, Finland and Morocco, we raised the ambition this year across 5 key areas. First, the agenda. From the Global Digital Compact to artificial intelligence and financing of innovation for good, the main stage will hear solutions-driven conversation led by dynamic speakers and expert moderators. Second, the outreach and engagement. Over 2,000 participants will join us this week, online and in person, in a more modern, interactive space. Third, the ecosystem around the forum. Over 50 side events spanning universities, civil society, and the private sector. They bring fresh energy. Fourth, global multi-stakeholder inclusion with support from partners. Scientists, innovators from all over the world are joining us, enriching the conversation together with government, science, philanthropic and private sector participants. This day is not just a milestone, it's a launchpad for the vision embedded in the Pact for the Future. Let's carry the energy of the Action Day forward through the forum and beyond as we make science, technology, and innovation true accelerators of progress for both people and planet. Thank you. And now I have the pleasure of presenting our first keynote speaker, a special message from Her Excellency Dr. Amal El-Falah Segrouchi, Minister Delegate for Digital Transformation and Administration Reform of the Kingdom of Morocco.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues, amis du développement durable et du numérique. C'est un honneur et un plaisir de prendre la parole aujourd'hui à l'occasion de l'Action Day du Forum Sciences, Technologie et Innovation, le STI, dans son édition de l'année 2025 qui s'ouvre sous le thème « Faire progresser les solutions scientifiques et technologiques durables, inclusives et fondées sur des données probantes pour l'agenda 2030 et ses objectifs de développement durable ». L'édition de cette année constitue un moment charnière. Elle marque le premier forum depuis l'adoption du pacte numérique mondial, le Global Digital Compact, par les États membres. Ce pacte insiste sur la nécessité d'une feuille de route ambitieuse pour garantir une IA responsable, des infrastructures numériques résilientes, le respect des droits fondamentaux. Comme son nom l'indique, cette journée doit marquer la concrétisation des engagements par des actions concrètes impliquant États, gouvernements, secteur privé, société civile, institutions académiques, etc. Honorable assistance, comme vous le savez tous, le numérique constitue aujourd'hui un levier structurant pour la transformation économique et sociale à condition de mettre en place une gouvernance éthique et inclusive. C'est dans cette perspective que l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies a adopté en mars 2024 une résolution fondamentale pour la gouvernance de l'intelligence artificielle, portée par les États-Unis d'Amérique et le Royaume du Maroc et soutenue par plus de 120 pays. Cette résolution souligne la nécessité de développer et d'utiliser l'IA dans le respect des droits humains tout au long du cycle de vie des technologies. Elle appelle également à une coopération internationale pour réduire la fracture numérique en soutenant particulièrement les pays en développement dans leur accès aux outils numériques. Le Royaume du Maroc s'inscrit pleinement dans cette dynamique. Comme l'a souligné Sa Majesté le Roi Mohammed VI, que Dieu l'assiste, l'Afrique est en passe de devenir un laboratoire du monde numérique. Le digital est en train de changer le visage de notre continent, porté par une jeunesse inventive, créative et audacieuse. C'est en application des directives royales que le programme gouvernemental confirme la volonté de faire du Maroc un pays qui ambitionne de se transformer en nation numérique, d'accélérer la transition digitale au service du citoyen et de réduire la fracture numérique pour assurer l'inclusion sociale. Ainsi, la stratégie nationale de transition numérique Maroc Digital 2030, outil de la transformation numérique au Maroc, s'appuie sur l'intelligence artificielle pour son accélération. Honorable assistance, je tiens à exprimer ma profonde reconnaissance à l'ensemble des partenaires, institutions et organisations qui rendent cette initiative possible. Votre expertise et votre engagement constituent le fondement même de cette coopération, illustrant la force du partenariat multilatéral. Ce que nous initions aujourd'hui ne doit pas se clore avec la fin de cette journée. Je vous encourage à poursuivre les discussions, à approfondir les liens tissés et à transformer les idées exprimées en actions concrètes. Je vous remercie de votre attention et souhaite plein succès à l'ensemble des travaux de cette édition. Merci.
Thank you to Her Excellency Segrouchi and the Kingdom of Morocco for making Action Day possible. And now it's my great honor to introduce someone who has spent decades challenging disinformation and defending press freedom and digital rights. She's the co-founder and CEO of Filipino news outlet Rappler and has been named Time Person of the Year. Please welcome, speaking live from Manila, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa.
Hello. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So first, let me be blunt and honest and talk about how artificial intelligence, which we will talk, you today will talk through and talk about it in innovative ways, but even that has become almost cursed for me. AI is a marketing term. It's coined in 1956 by John McCarthy. That term has been applied to various technologies over more than 70 years. But the current AI prominence, the hype around it today, is tied to a toxic surveillance model that threatens any kind of push for the Sustainable Development Goals. I sit as the vice chair of the Internet Governance Forum and takes apart some of the developments we've been through. The root of this toxic surveillance model can be traced back to the 1990s in the US, when two things that happened led to where we are today. There were no restrictions on commercial surveillance and the endorsement of advertising as the internet's business model. That's led to these monopolies in technology that's been established through search, social media, marketplaces, companies, big tech that invested in data collections and processing capabilities, and dominance that was aided by US government policies and soft power. We're seeing this kick in even more now. A lot of what we call innovation is not due to novel scientific approaches, but to the amount of available computational and data resources. That's part of what's created the monopoly. Let me just talk about some of the harms globally: surveillance and digital colonialism, biased and oppressive AI systems in the global south, the exploitation of the data workers in my part of the world, environmental damage from resource-intensive AI operations, and the distraction from the real harms through narratives of existential AI risk. What we haven't talked about much, not in any of the discussions we've really done at the UN publicly, are the dangers of AI and surveillance, military applications, the use of probabilistic techniques to determine targets based on data patterns, and the lack of transparency and accountability in this tech. But let me focus on the public information ecosystem, because globally, we are living in toxic sludge. The tech platforms that connect us hacked our biology so that lies laced with fear, anger, and hate spread faster and further than really boring facts. That has turned our world upside down. I mean, imagine telling your child to lie and rewarding them for every lie, and then telling them to do it repeatedly. And I'll say this over and over again since 2016. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality, no democracy, let alone fight these existential problems like climate change. In Manila tomorrow, we expect temperatures to go up to 43 degrees Celsius in 32 areas that are under a dangerous heat index. The problems of information operations I know firsthand because of social media, where for 6 years in a row, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. I've been called a criminal, a communist, CIA agent, anti-Semitic, anti-Palestinian. None of any of that is true. But big tech has ghettoized our world. Things that are illegal in the physical world are legal, or let's say are done with impunity in the virtual world. That's dividing us in ways that make our work as journalists, as civil society, near impossible. And women both bear the brunt and are leading the charge to reclaim our rights. So what do? In 2022, Dmitry Muratov and I, along with 300 Nobel laureate civil society groups around the world, released a 10-point action plan that was largely aimed at the European Union, because that was around the time it passed the DSA, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, as well as the AI Act. But it boils down to just 3 points. Stop surveillance for profit, because human rights includes digital rights. And this new business model of social media takes all our data and creates clones of each of us, used to micro-target us. This isn't the old advertising. It's finding our weakest moment to a message and selling that to a company or country. That is insidious manipulation. That surveillance for profit underlines this hype behind AI. 2, stop coded bias. if you're a woman, LGBTQ+, Black, brown, or from the Global South, if you're marginalized in the real world, you're further marginalized online. And we in the Global South are not only colonialized, again, this time by Silicon Valley Code, and you got to add TikTok in there now, those have built-in biases. Our people in my part of the world are the ones hired to clean up the data so you can use it in the West and the Global North. Third, journalism as an antidote to tyranny. How does this look in action? We have to move away from technology. In your chats, talk about what we do next, because the public information ecosystem has only gotten worse with generative AI. The term enshittification, coined by Cory Doctorow, the enshittification of the internet, is now in full swing with the chatbot arms race. Without integrity of facts, we can't have integrity of elections. And it's really interesting to point out that from 2016 until 2024, only one country, Romania, voided its elections because of manipulation on social media. So let's stop being users and become citizens. And let me just end with these three things. Please, let's redefine what civic engagement means in the age of exponential lies. In the long term, it's education. We need to understand this technology that's addictive, causing harm to our kids. I'm sure you will hear this from Biba and Kidron, but from the US Surgeon General's report from May 2023, there are greater incidents of sleeplessness, higher suicide rates, and epidemic of loneliness. In the medium term, it's legislation. Finally, in the short term, it is just us, the people in the room, the UN. You have power that sometimes we in the Global South don't have. So we're relying on you. In order to hit the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to restore our rights, reclaim our rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, joining us from Manila at almost 10:30 p.m. That was powerful. Up next, you're joined by Azim Azhar, renowned technologist, author of Exponential View, and one of the world's leading voices on technology and its impact on society. Welcome, Azim, joining us live on the big screen.
Well, good morning, Excellencies and distinguished guests, and thank you for the invitation to address you all. I think there's something very important happening in the technology industry right now, which is the speed with which the technology is changing, the fundamental technology platform, which, notwithstanding earlier remarks, is being referred to by the people building it, the people investing it, and the people using it as artificial intelligence. And the rate with which the core technologies are developing and improving is quite unprecedented when you look at the benchmarks. The rate with which costs are coming down for end users and for businesses is also unprecedented. And that's resulting in the uptake of the technology by enterprises and businesses and consumers at rates that we have never seen before. We heard about TikTok, for example, and TikTok was one of the fastest growing consumer applications in the world, but it has not grown as quickly as some of the recent generative AI technologies. I will take you through a handful of slides to help frame how this technology can be seen from an economic perspective and what the implications and opportunities are. I think it's the single most disruptive, for good and bad, trend that is happening within the technology industry right now, and it is where, because of the opportunities, the capital, both public and private, is focusing. So I will share my screen now and just walk us through a few slides. Okay, here we go. So ChatGPT, which started as an experiment a little over 2.5 years ago, has become one of the fastest growing consumer applications in the world. That is, end users all over the world, the United States and India being the two biggest markets, has grown rapidly, and it will end 2025 generating more than $10 billion annualized in revenues. Those revenues coming not from the advertising business model of the old internet, but from consumer subscriptions for the product itself. And my expectation will be that these types of technologies, whether they are specifically chatbots or capabilities delivered by them, will be ubiquitous for most consumers accessing the internet through smartphones or through search engines within 3 years. What we've discovered by looking at the data of how people use this is that as they start to use these new AI tools, they tend to use them more frequently, and they will also replace their traditional use of internet search for finding information. Now, for many of us, we'll have heard of the idea of the ChatGPT moment, which was the idea that the way that the technology industry looked at this opportunity changed when ChatGPT launched. And there's some evidence to show that. So these technologies, these AI systems are built on what's known as foundation models. And foundation models are big, complicated pieces of software. They require a large amount of computing capability, which in turn, of course, requires electricity, and it requires a lot of data as well. And the foundation models are produced by a number of large companies, Anthropic, OpenAI being two, and XAI being three of them, all quite young companies, none older than 10 years, and then Google and Meta and some others. Each of these models, each of these crosses on this chart is an expensive bit of research and development. Towards the right-hand side of the chart, these models cost between $50 and $150 million to train, that is to build. They are much cheaper to operate. You see there is a distinct pattern here, and here is the distinct pattern. Before the launch of ChatGPT, marked in that red circle, a new foundation model was being released every 6 months. That is 2 models a year by all the players. Since ChatGPT, that model cadence has increased to 1 model every 2 weeks, or 2 models a month. So you're seeing far more models being developed, which each model being more expensive to build, requiring more technical capability, and having more technical performance from the other side. And this really, I think, brings home the notion that the entirety of this multi-trillion-dollar industry is really zeroing in on generative AI as the next platform upon which they will build. Now, this is an industry that certainly understands very, very rapid change. It has been built on the notion of Moore's law, the idea that essentially every couple of years, every year the cost of computing drops by about half, and that compounds over time. It's why the smartphone of today is more powerful than the mainframe computer of the 1980s. And it's Moore's law, that blue line, that has driven the creation of a multi-trillion-dollar industry. Moore's law made computing cheap. As computing got cheaper, there were more applications you could build from it. Because there were more applications, more businesses and consumers started to use computers, and the cycle repeated. To the right, you see the purple line, which is the growth of the amount of compute used to train foundation models. And what you see is it's a much steeper line, because that is growing far faster than the trend, the clock speed of Moore's law. And these are logarithmic scales, by the way, on the 2 y-axes. And so that is another data point to try to get across just how rapidly this industry is now moving and how it's accelerating. This isn't just happening in the software layer. Below the software of the AI models is the material technologies of the semiconductors upon which they run. And before the ChatGPT moment, the semiconductor companies would run on a 4-year cycle to produce new chips. Chips are incredibly complex to manufacture. They have trillions of individual transistors. The factories that make them cost tens of billions of dollars. And yet, the commercial demand and opportunity from generative AI has seen a compression of that cycle from 4 year to 1 year, and at the same time, a delivery of vastly improved technical characteristics. In this case, this is the energy efficiency, the amount of energy required to run computations, which is currently improving at tens of percents every year. That has in turn triggered a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure cycle. This is something that you can see very, very visibly in 2025. The big 5 American tech companies will spend about $300 billion on capital expenditure, of which about 160 billion, 180 billion will go into buying the GPU chips needed to train and run AI models. And you can see the ChatGPT moment again between 2022 and 2023, that significant uptick. Now, the thing to note here is that these investments are highly concentrated in, but not exclusive to, the 5 big tech companies in America, and of course in China there is a similar ecosystem emerging. But this is an expensive endeavor to build this infrastructure, which is why you are starting to see a number of sovereign governments, such as the UAE and those in India, for example, and across Europe, trying to invest in their own compute infrastructure. When you think about the performance of these models, they are measured across a whole range of different benchmarks. No benchmark is complete, and no benchmark is perfect, which is why we need to use a large number. On one particular benchmark, which is called GPQA, an AI model is pitched against difficult technical questions that a subject specialist with a doctorate, a PhD in, could answer if they had access to the internet. And the benchmark for that human expert is about 70%. About 2 years ago, the best of these models could only do about as well as a human guessing. But what you can see in the chart is that in that short 2-year period of time, we've gone from random guessing to a recent Google model called Gemini 2.5 being better at every one of these PhD level subject questions than a PhD in their own subject. So not only does it have the in-subject expertise, it's got that in-subject expertise across domains as dissimilar as biochemistry and archaeology. While the cost to actually build these machines, these software machines, is significant, running into the hundreds of millions of dollars, the cost to use them on the other side has declined very, very significantly. In this benchmark, we can look at the cost, for example, of using the GPT-4 model, which was the real breakthrough model 2 years ago. It has dropped in cost by roughly a factor of 250 in the last 2 years. It's 250 times cheaper now to use those types of models. And those cost curves exist across all other models. They're expensive when they start. They get cheaper quickly because the incentives of the model company, the AI company, is to bring the costs down. If it's too expensive for them to serve it, they can't serve it profitably. What we're starting to see now is these models being able to undertake longer and longer tasks in the work environment. One benchmark is to look and see the extent to which a model can undertake a software development task without any human intervention. And if you look at the trajectory just 2 years ago, the longest they could work was about a minute before making a mistake. As of April this year, the leading edge models were able to achieve 50 minutes of software development without human intervention. In other words, do nearly an hour's worth of human software coding without making a mistake. The trend seems to be that the models are improving so much that every 7 months, that duration doubles. So if that trend continues, and it may not continue, but it's worth thinking if it does, by 2030, an AI model should be able to do the equivalent of 200 hours of human software development for less than $100. And today, hiring a human to do that costs between $5,000 and $10,000. And that's a really important implication for how we think about economic effects. Of course, all the shortcomings that exist within these models, companies are using them to grow faster, to build code faster, to develop their products faster. And one piece of evidence there is if you look at the cohort of early stage companies that come out of Y Combinator, which is the world's premier startup incubator, they're growing 3 times faster, AI companies, than companies that were traditional software firms. And you can see this, the time it takes them to get to $30 million of revenue is literally a third of that, of the best cohort of non-AI companies. And so what you see and what I see when I talk to these companies is that their software developers are far more productive, generating 95% of their code using AI, and an individual being able to do the work of an entire team. Needless to say, that has started to have an impact on how leading edge technology companies think about hiring. So a number of companies like Duolingo in language learning, Instacart and Shopify, the CEO of Shopify here, have said reflexive AI usage is now a baseline. And essentially, in these companies, you cannot hire new headcount unless you can prove you can't get what you need to get done using AI. And in some sense, that is essentially a headcount freeze. So let's just quickly tie those themes and trends together by saying, well, what could this actually mean? This is really about trying to get across the speed of change and improvement of the technologies in particular domains. So if we analyze what the International Monetary Fund, a couple of investment banks, academics have said, looking at levels of employment and the AI task exposure on the x-axis of different job categories. I've got teachers, nurses, customer service reps, paralegals. What you see based on today's capabilities is that some of these roles are nearly 50% or more exposed to AI. But if we then extrapolate forward on the current rate of improvement, what you will start to see is every one of these curves move to the right. So in the case of customer service reps, getting to the stage where AI systems will be able to handle 80 to 90% of the tasks that a customer service rep does in a given day. And this introduces the challenge with the velocity gap, the exponential gap that we deal with. AI is on 12 monthly cycles or faster in terms of development and deployment by firms into their organizations, but policy is on a 4 to 5 year cycle. All of this time, we're going to see many workers face greater than 50% task overlap, which creates this fundamental challenge, which is the difference between the opportunity to capture the productivity uplift of 1 or 2% by being able to absorb the new technology and the new productivity it enables, or the challenge of facing real structural unemployment. And so for me, there are 2 sets of questions in this world of cheap intelligence. There's the economic policy, which is what happens to our economic model? What cushions workers as expert level AI diffuses in months rather than years? What needs to take place for firms in the global south to gain the same leverage as those elsewhere? How can regulators match weekly or monthly cadence of the technology? And what is the verification regime that manages some of the risks? And on the technology and the power side, we have to deal with the questions of, do these trillion-dollar capex cycles entrench a few firms? How do we fund and build these very large data centers while still considering obligations towards net zero? Are there opportunities to develop decentralized architectures which can actually limit or compete with the concentrated power structure that I've described earlier? How do we deal with the uncertainty that there might be frontier breakthroughs that are yet to emerge, and how we should govern those? And what do we do with this self-reinforcing dynamic that is starting to emerge, where AI is creating the right kind of economic incentive for further investment, speeding up its own R&D, which is further creating economic incentives? These are a set of very complex, challenging questions, which I hope you'll get a chance to discuss over the coming hours. Thank you.
Wow, that was powerful. And it makes me think that that's very true. The ChatGPT moment that Azim highlighted, that would be something like the Industrial Revolution for us as human beings. And in addition to the questions that Azim had, I think my question is, do we need to grow an exponential mindset to be able to evolve with this exponentially rapidly evolving technology? So thank you again, Azim, for that excellent presentation. For our next speaker, this is not off topic, I promise. Have you seen the movie Bridget Jones? Yes? Well, our next speaker was also a film director before her policy work, and one of her films was Bridget Jones. She's a global leader in digital regulation and children's rights, and founder of the Five Rights Foundation, a member of the UK House of Lords and advisor to the UN on AI. She also holds leadership roles at London School of Economics and Oxford University. Please join me in welcoming Baroness Kidron. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm not used to getting a little ooh when I'm introduced, but that's normally because someone hasn't actually been through my Wikipedia page. First of all, my very great thanks to you all for being here. That was absolutely fabulous. I would have come all the way from London just to hear Azim just now. What a thoughtful contribution. And I'm here to talk very specifically about children, but I'm not going to speak about all the harms they face, but I'm going to speak about what we must now do. Because 8 months ago, world leaders and industry gathered in this very room to welcome the Global Digital Compact. And on that day, I thank Special Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies, Amandeep Singh Gill, for putting children's rights at its core. And I thank him again today, and his colleagues who worked so hard. Someone's speaking back at me. How dare they? But this is a serious point, because the adoption of GDC means that signatory states have committed to, and I quote, strengthen legal and policy frameworks to protect the rights of the child in the digital space, and to prioritize the development and implementation of national online child safety policy and standards by 2030. 2030. And we have already heard this morning a chilling effect in the world on multilateral organizations and commitments, and the SDGs, the finance of the SDGs. And I am saying to you, we have made a commitment to children, and I am expecting that commitment to be followed through. Because we live in a time of great change and excitement, with the prospects of powerful problem-solving digital innovations being reported almost daily, as Azim has just taken us through. And this is actually possibly, potentially, quite exciting. But this excitement must be accompanied by anticipating what this new frontier of digital technology means for children. I've been working at the intersection of technology and children for more than a decade. And at every other previous inflection point, when the technology changed or the business model leapt in a different direction, those that built, distributed, or used those new products, sometimes blindly, but more often willfully, forgot to ask how it would impact on children. And when I say children, I make the point that a child of 5 is not the same as one of 15. And rarely does a child on the African continent share the same circumstances of a child here in New York or in London. But in the last decade, I have spoken to thousands of children, literally thousands of children on all continents, and they have one view. They love tech, but they hate its careless culture. And it is children who call for a kinder, safer, less addictive, more age-appropriate digital world. And the Global Digital Compact codifies our duty to answer their call. The language of legal frameworks, policies, and standards may well be dry, indeed it is, but it embodies the desire of millions, tens of millions of children, of their parents, and of many policymakers who, alongside the UN family, want a different digital settlement for our kids. Indeed, they want a global compact that contributes to children's flourishing and whose legacy is visible in the lived experience of children. So it is time, today is our day of action, and it is time to turn these written obligations into actions. We have the UN's General Comment 25. It provides a roadmap. The Global Digital Compact provides us with a timeline. And over the last months, in Europe, in Indonesia, in the UK, in the US, we have seen the passage of regulation and legislation with at its heart child protection and a commitment to children's flourishing. AI dominates our landscape. 5 Rights, of which I am proud to be founder and chair, recently published the Children's AI Design Code, a protocol to identify, evaluate, and mitigate the risks that AI systems present to children. It was, at a recent launch, dubbed the Ferrari of codes by the Council of Europe. They also said by the time it's implemented, it may have to be a Toyota. But I recommend to you the Ferrari version. But 5 Rights is working hard to embed this protocol across the globe, across the global ecosystem of those responsible for the development and the oversight of AI systems. And it is built on this single piece of wisdom, that we know children are different, that we know children are on a journey from dependence to autonomy, And we know that the adult world has responsibilities, a duty of care for their flourishing. The argument of tech lobbyists that designing with children in mind stifles innovation must be thoroughly dismissed. Many highly regulated sectors, aerospace, pharma, consumer goods, financial services, energy, are hugely profitable and competitive despite and sometimes even because of their regulatory requirements. For decades, we have had a global consensus that when it comes to children, we would be ambitious, not only for their safety, but for their flourishing. And whilst children are not the only people for whom we are obligated, to whom we are obligated, the research is unequivocal. A society's investment in its children enjoys a disproportionate rate of return across every domain of human flourishing. Today is a day of action. The Digital Global Compact has told us what to do. The tools of regulation, safety, privacy, and protocols, such as the Children and AI Design Code, and treaty documents like General Comment 25, tell us how to do it. This morning, I ask you, I urge you, I beg you, let's advance the Global Digital Compact by renewing an ambitious commitment to children's flourishing. Thank you.
Baroness Kidron, for being the voice of millions of children out there today in this Action Day. That was eye-opening and inspiring. Thank you for your remarks. Now, please join me in welcoming the man whose job is to make digital technologies more inclusive, rights-respecting, and globally coordinated. Please welcome Under-Secretary General and the Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, Amandeep Singh Gill. Welcome.
Thank you very much. And I know we're running a little late, so I'll keep it short. In any case, it's a tough act to follow. Maria Ressa, Azim Azhar, Biban Kidron. What I thought I'd do today is to bring to New York a flavor of a recent experience in South Africa, in Port Elizabeth, where ODET, along with the African Union Commission, did a workshop on how data, AI, and digital public infrastructure come together to drive an inclusive digital economy. And my main point today, essentially, is that the GDC's center point is the inclusive digital economy. And related to this, my point is that all the 5 objectives of the GDC are interlocking. They come together beautifully thanks to the work done by Anna Karin, Ambassador Chola Milambo, and all stakeholders that participated in the GDC. So we have a couple of challenges today. The first one is demographic. The median age in Africa is 19 years. In South Asia, half the population is less than 28 years of age. What that means is that you have to create 1 million jobs every month in both these regions. So imagine 12 million jobs every year. And well-paying quality jobs are unlikely to come from agriculture or extractive industries. And even in manufacturing, when you have the scenario that is there today, headwinds for manufactured goods are growing stronger. So you're not going to get your answers from there. The only silver lining is the digital economy. In countries as diverse as Colombia, Peru, Philippines, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, the digital economy is growing at least twice as fast as the rest of the GDP, more than 10% compounded per annum. This provides a ray of hope for us for progress on the SDGs when only 17% of the SDGs are on track by 2030. And I submit to you that the importance of the digital economy is not only limited to dealing with the youth bulge that developing countries face, but also the constrained fiscal space in which they operate. In a few weeks from now, we will gather at the 4th Conference on Financing for Development in Seville, Spain. Stakes are high. The SDGs financing gap has soared to 4 trillion per year, and raising capital has never been harder. 4 out of 10 people everywhere live in countries where governments spend more on debt repayments and interest than on health or education. So imagine if just by dropping the cost of a basic transaction in the economy, which is know your customer for opening a bank account, getting access to a mobile phone, providing another service from, say, $23 per transaction to 50 cents per transaction. And if 100 million people could benefit from this annually, straight away you're generating $2.25 billion per year. That's literally money out of thin air, which helps deal with this constrained fiscal space. This is the opportunity that the GDC highlights with its focus on building an inclusive digital economy as one of the 5 objectives. And importantly, it ties that objective, the inclusive digital economy, with 4 other key goals without which we cannot succeed. In a moment, you'll hear more about how the Global Digital Compact came about and how different stakeholders are taking it forward. It's our duty to make sure that this ambitious agreement is taken forward. There are important processes underway on the AI governance modalities, on data governance, and I'm pleased that both the chair and the vice chair of the CSTD Working Group on Data Governance are here today. So we need to work together to take these processes forward and harness them for meeting our overall objectives for the Global Digital Compact. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, USG Gill, for your excellent remarks, reminding us on the opportunities we have for building an inclusive digital economy in implementation of global digital compacts. So, in our next segment, we want to hear from some of the people who were key in creating the global digital compact. But instead of looking back, we will discuss how stakeholders from government, the private sector, and civil society will turn the global digital compact commitments into action. Our moderator for the panel will be the former co-facilitator of the Global Digital Compact, Ambassador Anna-Karin Ennerström. After having served as permanent representative of Sweden, she now is the special advisor of digitalization in the Office of the President of the General Assembly. A round of applause for Anna-Karin.
Thank you so much, Avashan, and good morning to everyone here today. I see so many colleagues that were with me and Ambassador Chulla on this journey to elaborate and adopt the Global Digital Compact. And it is almost a bit emotional to stay here, to be here today on the stage discussing the implementation of a compact that I spent almost 2 years in in negotiating, and I'm very happy that my fellow co-facilitator, Ambassador Chula, will be with me here today. So for those of you that might not have been part of this journey, just to say that the Global Digital Compact is a comprehensive framework for digital cooperation. It is really a historic achievement for global digital cooperation and a once-in-a-generation opportunity to harness the immense potential of digital technology and to close all digital divides. So our goal here today is to explore on the process that led to the GDC, but more importantly, how we, stakeholders, governments, the private sector, and the NGO community can turn this commitment into action. And to do that, I'm very honored to be joined by 5 leaders to bring real insight into this journey. And I welcome to the stage Ambassador Chula Milambo, Permanent Representative of Zambia to the United Nations. Whitney Baird, CEO, U.S. Council for International Business. Thomas Lamanauskas, Deputy Secretary General of the International Telecommunication Union. And Chubo Mukherjee, Vice President and Global Head of Sustainability, Nokia. And lastly, Natasha Crampton, Chief Responsible AI Officer at Microsoft. Please take your seats. So we will we'll start with some of the actors that really made this GDC happen. So I will start, of course, with my very good friend and former colleague, Chula. If you can say a few words on why this endeavor was so important and what was new with it.
All right, thank you so much. And firstly, it's good to see you again. Fantastic stuff. Worked very well together with Sweden and Zambia, so just most grateful to share this stage with you. And also just to share the stage with the other panelists. Thank you very much. But very quickly, first and foremost, at the UN, it was observed through our common agenda, which the Secretary General pushed out, that technology was changing much rapidly. Very fast changes in the world. Technology is always changing, but it's the pace at which technology was changing that was different. And there's a clear recognition that growing digital divides may translate into a development divide. And therefore, to protect the SDGs and protect human rights, the member states had to come together to look at the evolving landscape and respond very, very quickly. And in the wisdom of the Secretary General, he called on member states that can you put together a pact that would be the first agreement among member states on how to collaborate on digital affairs. And so Sweden was appointed together with member state Rwanda, and the co-facilitator for Rwanda had to take another assignment, and so Zambia was called upon in the process, and we worked together from 2023 to 2024. Through those discussions, many things came out. Member states, as the UN process goes, put all their interests out there, and we had this concoction of interests which were culminated into an elements paper, which many of you contributed to. In that elements paper, the co-facilitator had to classify the several issues, clustered them into 5 sections, which are the 5 objectives of the GDC, starting with connectivity, going all the way down to data governance and artificial intelligence. And as the process goes from 2023 to last year, September, we went through detailed negotiations on very many important, pertinent issues, collaborating with all stakeholders, member states, civil society, the academia, the tech community, and we finally came out with this document which was agreed by all member states. And to get to your point, what is new in the Global Digital Compact? The first thing is that it's a global agreement. It's the first of its kind. I think that's the very first thing. A clear recognition that we need a document that points from a UN document, which was said sometimes very mundane and dry, but straight to the SDGs, all right? And in the GDC, we have almost each commitment with an SDG attached to it. So it's very practical. And also in there, there's a clear recognition of the importance of closing the digital divide, the size. The numbers vary, but the point is that a good chunk of the population of the world remains not connected to date, and we need to accelerate that. The other new things in there, of course, I mean, there's several. The other is commitments around child rights, commitments around women's rights. The youth in there are included. It's a document that includes almost everybody. And then we have the component around data governance, which the CSTD is moving on already. And then there's a component on AI, which usually attracts most of the attention. And already we see that within the UN, there's the establishment of ODET, the Office for Digital and Emerging Technologies, as well as discussions on the AI governance framework. And that has really mainly two components, very quickly. The first is the independent panel, which member states are already engaged on in the text, with proposals around two classes of experts, one which is strictly experts appointed, and then the other one elected by member states. So the process is going on. The second component is the global dialogue, which will be a platform from which all member states can have inputs and also receive inputs from the independent dialogue and the independence panel, and also really talk about the cutting-edge issues that are taking place in the world. It's filling a gap. It's filling a gap of voice, it's filling a gap of governance, which member states have been calling for. The UN is the platform where all member states have something to say about it. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chula. Thomas, ITU was, of course, a key player in getting the GDC in place. And the Secretary General has now set up his PACT steering committee with a working group on digital technologies. So could you tell us a bit on how you see ITU as one of the vice chairs working with ODET and the other vice chairs in supporting the implementation?
So thank you very much, Anna-Karen. Thank you much, Ambassador, indeed. So once ambassador, always ambassador. So great to see you on the stage as well, continuing this important work. And of course, thank you, Ambassador from Zambia, for his leadership during the GDC Compact adoption, and now so eloquently explaining what's happening now from the member state side. And indeed, we're honored together with Amandeep to serve as co-chairs of Working Group on Digital Technologies, for Secretary General inviting us in this role. And really through that, helping to organize UN system on the UN system side, to implement and to make sure the Global Digital Compact is given force. So the different layers in this regard, how we achieve that. Of course, one is the coordination. So Working Group of Digital Technologies itself, with its 6 working groups, because 5 is objectives of Global Digital Compact, plus 1 STI chapter of the Pact of the Future. And all of those have co-leads as well, pushing really on the specific vertical areas. And ITU also serves there as a co-lead together with UNESCO and ODET on AI, and together with UNDP on digital divides, really making sure that we well organized there. And of course, we together work to prepare the work plan, and now working on a GDC implementation map to make sure that that work is well organized. But I think it's more importantly as well, or as important, is to really give life to those specific GDC commitments, and to make sure that, as GDC says as well, that all the different mechanisms are really fully leveraged for GDC implementation. So one, of course, is mechanisms, which is also very important as well, some information society process, 20 years old process that brings the world around digital goals, let's say, and this is, and we have already mechanisms that UN system was working together, including United Nations Group on Information Society, or UNGIS for short. So UNGIS already produced the mapping between the WSIS objectives and GDC objectives, and with the specific initiatives next to that, so we're making sure that all those initiatives are geared to deliver on this. We'll also leverage other groups, such as, for example, Interagency Working Group on Artificial Intelligence, that since 2021 was bringing UN system together and to really collaborate on the on AI, and again, the work plan of this group was adjusted to the to fit the GDC objectives, and to really push there to make sure that we have a joint toolkit in this regard as well. things like Partnership for Measuring of ICTs, which is again one of the outcomes of WSIS, is now working together with building an ITU ICT data hub to really make sure that we can measure GDC implementation and have measurable statistics there as well. We're also organizing different subgroups. So we, in Geneva, we started with our colleagues what we call Geneva Digital Kitchen. It's just some of those who work between Geneva and New York, would recognize where the kitchen is coming from. So the idea is that to bring all the different agencies in Geneva together to make sure that we really work together to progress on the pact implementation. And we started with a broader Geneva contribution plan, but now we're looking through thematics. We started with human rights, went to the future of work and jobs, and now looking in other areas such as health and environment and other areas to really make sure that, again, GDC ethos is spreading to the different aspects of that. Again, and then the last maybe layer is actually specific initiatives, very quickly, to kind of really make sure that we don't wait for coordination to finish, but really jump on a pact implementation. So already in October last year, just a month after the pact adoption and GDC adoption, we launched what was a first AI Standards Summit together with the World Standards Corporation that includes IEC and ISO, and we already have a second summit coming up in December this year, so coordinating on AI standards. We already launched AI Skills Coalition with more than 40 partners, and which aims to reach around 10,000 people by the end of this year. To really bring the AI capacity to everyone. And we launched things like Digital Infrastructure Investment Initiative with 7 development finance institutions to bridge a 1.6 trillion infrastructure investment gap. So I think, the reality there is for the pact to really make an impact, we really need to fire off all the cylinders together, but also, we need to coordinate, but also need to push it together on specific areas as well. So thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Thomas. So let's turn to stakeholders. Whitney, the stakeholders, the role of the stakeholders in delivering on the commitments and the objectives in the GDC is really, really crucial. So could you tell us a bit on how you, as a stakeholder from the private sector, looks at the GDC and the role of stakeholders in the process? And maybe telling us about 1 or 2 priorities that you see with the implementation of the GDC.
Great, thank you very much, and delighted to be here. I've really enjoyed the previous keynote speeches, very informative. So the U.S. Council for International Business, or USCIB, was created in 1945, the same year as the UN, and one of our primary objectives is to work for the voice of business to be heard as a stakeholder in these discussions, and particularly in this case in the UN. For us, for the GDC to be, I think, both credible and implementable, it was really quite important that all of the relevant stakeholders be involved, but particularly business, because frankly, the pace of innovation is being pushed through the private sector. In my case, I followed the US private sector, but I would say the private sector quite broadly internationally. We were really very pleased working with the Tech Envoy. I thought that and the co-facilitators, I think we felt like the GDC process was really a model process in bringing through all of the relevant stakeholders, and particularly, I think, from our perspective, our members, among them Microsoft and others, to be able to bring business use information and in specific cases, so that the output, the actual compact, was, I think, the best possible document. And we look forward to, USCIB has endorsed the GDC. Our members are closely engaged and would like to stay engaged. So I think it's a great model and one we look forward to working on further.
Thank you so much, and thanks for endorsing the GDC as well. I think it would be interesting for the people here to hear more about the public-private partnerships. So Natasha, you were part of the Secretary General's high-level advisory body for artificial intelligence, and some of the proposals that you put forward also found their way into the DGC. So maybe you could tell us a bit about those and how you see the stakeholders can actually promote the implementation of these proposals.
Absolutely, and likewise, thank you for the invitation to be here today. So as a member of the UN Secretary General's AI advisory body, I was one of the people who stepped up to the tall order that the Secretary General had for us. He asked us to advance recommendations for the international governance of AI with a deep center on our shared values and our humanity and making sure that we could advance the Sustainable Development Goals. So it was actually in this very building here that we came together in person in December 2023 to work on this ambitious project together. It was really quite an amazing group that came together, all in our individual capabilities. There were 39 members representing governments and industry, civil society and academia from all corners of the globe and with a huge array of experience. It was really important that we brought together people with deep technical expertise, with experience in the humanities, the social sciences, and much, much more. So we got to work quickly. By the end of December 2023, we had produced our interim report. And by September 2024, as the GDC was about to be adopted, we produced this report here, which embodies our final recommendations. It's a good read, I recommend it. What you'll see inside is that we grouped our recommendations by 4 core themes that we thought were really important to push forward the international governance of AI. The first was that we felt there needed to be a common understanding. There needed to be common ground in setting policy. There needed to be common benefits and a coherent effort. So it was just a real delight for us after coming together as that group to see that several of our 7 key recommendations were brought forward in the Global Digital Compact. And in particular, the calls that we made to establish an international scientific panel on AI and a global dialogue on AI governance. There were also themes that were picked up from the ideas that we had around the importance of funding capacity development. It's been wonderful to see ODET stand up as the coordinating office that we believed was necessary as well as echoes of the standards and data governance recommendations that we had. So as we wound up our work on the advisory body, I think all of us were delighted with the outcome and also determined for the work ahead, because in many ways our work was just beginning as we returned to our institutions and our individual endeavours to help bring this to life. So when I think about the many ways in which private-public partnerships can help push the GDC forward here, I thought it would be helpful to just highlight 3 today that I'm sure will be built on by others. The first is that we do need to advance the science of AI and build that common understanding of the scientific foundations. And what that means in practice is that private sector organizations that have the ability to drive forward the fundamental science, to contribute funding into the ecosystem to help with this, must continue to do so because we need to mature the state of the science in order to take advantage of the AI opportunities ahead of us. The second is that as organizations around the world are increasingly not just developing AI, but actually adopting it at scale, there are shared best practices that are emerging from those learnings that we need to capture and make available broadly. One of the great things that I've seen emerge really with renewed vigor lately is a strong open source ecosystem that really is critical to driving the diffusion of the technology around the world. The third part, of course, is capacity development, and some element of that is the critical infrastructure investments that need to be made. You know, Microsoft itself, just in the last financial year, has invested more than $80 billion in infrastructure investments, including in the Global South, and my colleague from Nokia will speak more to that. But I think in addition to the infrastructure investments that often attract a lot of the attention, it's very, very important to make a similar investment in skilling. I think our perspective at Microsoft is that these globally developed technologies need to be coupled with local innovation. And skilling is key to being able to making sure that people are well equipped to use the technology to solve their problems in the way that they know best.
Thank you so much, Natasha. And Chubo, the Global Digital Compact points to the importance of global digital infrastructure for the global economy. Maybe you could tell us a bit on how Nokia is working on this.
Thank you. That you would expect from a digital company. So first of all, it's great to be here at this pivotal moment of the Global Digital Compact. It's sometimes from outside, it is actually not so visible how much work, as you all described, has gone in and in scaling the Global Digital Compact. Everyone in this room obviously is deep into it. But I also feel that it's also our opportunity and responsibility to scale this and bring this to a huge population out there. I would also say sometimes the work of ITU, for example, it's hard to keep up with Thomas in terms of the momentum that ITU brings in. I would draw attention to the part about, I very much agree digital skilling is super critical, but I'll put spotlight on the digital infrastructure, which is a big part of Global Digital Compact. So Nokia has been in the business of connectivity for several decades, and we are a trusted communication technology company headquartered in Finland, in operations in 130 countries. And our amidst all the jobs that we have in terms of bringing the digital and physical fusion and getting the world ready for the 6G and the AI era, the one that really keeps us going is to be able to bridge the digital divide. We know that there is close to 2.6 billion people who are still underserved by broadband connectivity. We also know that just a 10% increase in broadband penetration, as per World Bank, can create close to I have my data here, 1.5% increase in GDP per capita. We have seen this in many countries around the world. And while there is a significant gap, close to $0.9 trillion of digital infrastructure gap that we know that we all have to bridge, there is hope, right? For example, at Nokia, we connected 1.1 billion additional mobile subscribers together with our customers just in the last 3 years. Scaling to home broadband is growing. Just in the last 1 year, 40 million home broadband new connections got added. And what do all these things mean? These things mean that there are opportunities that communities who did not have the opportunities before are being able to connect to. For example, in South Africa, there have been new business model to get connectivity of fiber speed connectivity to communities who never had internet before. And this is, through public-private partnership. The connectivity is available today at 25 cents for a day. In Peru, in the Amazonian forest area, subaquatic connectivity has connected more than 500,000 users in 400 villages just in one year. We have seen in Egypt, for example, in the Haya Karema initiative has connected more than 4,000 villages through the government intervention and public-private partnership. We're also seeing new models of development. We see huge opportunities of non-terrestrial connectivity. For example, we are working with a company called AST Mobile, who is working with Vodafone and AT&T and others to bring satellite connectivity and 3GPP-based technology to a regular mobile phone that allows many in the global south to be able to access satellite connectivity. So there is a huge gap still in digital infrastructure. We know the gap also needs to be bridged together with building electricity infrastructure. We have seen this in the mobile connectivity era. We're seeing this now in the scale up of the AI era. So the work of infrastructure in general needs to scale for us to be able to bring digital connectivity and the opportunities of scaling to a wider population. And I'm not just talking about Global South. We have seen in the US, in Europe, for example, during COVID, how much digital gap exacerbates the education of children in school. So this has to be quickly bridged, and I do see innovative business models and scaling up of technology as well as public-private partnership can help.
Thank you so much, Juba. Natasha, if I can come back to you on a more company-focused question. You lead the responsible AI for one of the most leading technical companies. So why is international cooperation so important for your work on responsible AI governance?
So international cooperation on AI governance is so critical simply because it is a key enabler of the broad adoption of this technology. It's what makes it possible for us to be able to get the technology into the hands of all of the people around the world who want to be able to use it. So we really think about the role of international cooperation here in three dimensions. This international cooperation can help to set standards, it can help to broaden access to the technology, and it can also help to manage globally significant risks. So if I take each of those in turn, on standards, if you think about it, in all of our lives, we benefit from high standards that have been adopted broadly around the world. If, like me, you caught a plane to get here, you know that airline safety is underpinned by a set of standards around the world. If you fly from New York to Geneva, you do not need to sort of stop halfway and redo the flight safety checks. There's a system of standards that underpins civil aviation, which helps to facilitate movement around the world. Now, the same holds true for AI. Today's advanced AI systems often have multiple AI models as a part of them, and they might come from multiple providers. So we don't want a world in which, you know, an innovative startup in the global south comes up with a product that they then want to make available to the world, and they find themselves in a position where they need to do time-consuming and expensive testing of fundamentally the same risks in many different places around the world. So there's a place where standards can help to lift and set a high standard, but also facilitate the technology moving around the world. Second, on ensuring broader access to the technology. You know, at Microsoft, the way we think about AI is that it is the next great general purpose technology. So like electricity or the personal computer, it is going to fundamentally transform our societies and also our economies. But it's not actually a given that just because a technology is a general purpose technology, that it's going to be made available broadly around the world. As we've just heard from Suto, there's a whole range of existing digital infrastructure debt and gaps that we need to fill. And we need to make sure that we broadly do that for AI and proactively do that for AI so that its benefits can be shared around the world. Finally, on managing risks, AI is not a technology that can be contained within particular borders, and its impacts will be felt broadly. So there is a class of globally significant risks that we will need to stay ahead of so that we can really, truly take advantage of the AI opportunity. So for us at Microsoft, the way that we see the Global Digital Compact is that it is a great foundation for that multi-stakeholder collaborations that's going to be necessary in order to facilitate those objectives. I think it represents a new step forward in the type of flexible and agile governance that we'll need to meet this moment.
Thank you so much. And of course, the GDC recognizes very much the enormous potential of the digital tools, but also warns against some of the risks with it, especially when it comes to human rights, but also vulnerable communities and the planet. So, Jobo, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit on how you see the GDC supporting the SDGs, and especially through a lens of social corporate responsibility and digital. You already spoke about digital infrastructure, but if you could sort of link that together as well. Thanks.
Sure. So I'll comment on the importance of a lot of the GDC focus is about human rights in information and also about the digital skills. We fundamentally also believe that human rights, digitalization is a tool for social impact, but human rights is fundamental in terms of protecting as we scale digital impact to wider societies. We have seen that information has been used as a weapon to, to affect communities and exacerbate the gap in many communities around the world. In the world that we are in today, where we are seeing conflicts rising from different parts of the world, we have also seen how information can be both a tool that helps to bridge those differences, but also to expand those differences. And I think building the communication infrastructure in a responsible way that does not let the users of those digital tools to be affecting the lives of the communities they are supposed to protect in a negative way is the responsibility of both the technology makers, some of us are in this room, as well as the policy makers. And human rights due diligence is something very fundamental in terms of how we operate around 130 countries. And so does many of the corporations that are represented as part of the GDC. But I would also suggest that becomes the fundamentals of human rights actually goes very well embedded in the way GDC is implemented across all the companies. As AI scales, I think the role of how human rights due diligence in terms of information flow has seen over the past few years in the social media world, in the communication infrastructure world. Now we have an opportunity to bring the responsible AI framework and the human rights due diligence framework of the OECD coming together. And that's something that we are committed to work together with the industry ecosystems. And the last thing I mentioned, I'll touch upon digital skills, is we also see that the lack of, the connectivity is not enough. The lack of digital skills is also expanding the digital divide in many economies, and AI is a matter of a fear and a thing of in many in the global south. It's something that most people are not yet in a stage of adopting fast enough. And I think the digital skill building as an opportunity for public-private partnership while infrastructure development needs to go hand in hand, and we are very committed to that as well.
Thank you so much. Thomas, we see, of course, that digital technologies are evolving very quickly. At the same time, we are seeing that there are different priorities from government to the NGOs to the private sector. So I was wondering if you could say a few words on how you see that the digital cooperation can keep pace with innovation at the same time as we are bringing in all these different perspectives.
So thank you very much, and that's actually good to say to me to say that this is 160 years anniversary of ITU this year, So I think technologies evolve quickly, but some things last, that govern technologies. And I think in 160 years we also learn how to adapt to this constant change and accompany it, and a few principles there. And I think that's why it's very important for us to have still technology neutral frameworks and not to try to capture everything today in the policy decisions, but really make sure that, that we are able to keep up in a very collaborative way. And there are a few rules there, So first of all, it's a really good mix between policy development and standards development. Because I think as policy development, we will never be able to keep up with the technology development. And that's why we are proud as ITU to be standards organization, starting with our need was when telegraph needed to be transported across the border, so it doesn't need to be transcribed every time it crosses it. And now we're doing the same with AI, with more than 400 standards on AI today developed. And this is the only way to really make sure that these policy objectives are then transposed in the real life to the very well-developed standards that should be changed very quickly. And I think that is a good recognition by GDC, it's a good recognition by HLab there, and I think we need to kind of keep up with that. So another thing is, of course, is really collaborative nature of that. And that's how we develop standards, but that's how we should be developing policies. This is ITU ethos. Again, where some of our, as some of you may know, ITU is pretty unique in an agency that we also have sector members, which is private sector, in addition to the member states. Actually 1,000 of them. Very happy to have a couple of our sector members here on the panel as well. And I think this is also the way we develop standards. This is exactly private sector comes together with the governments, really work through that in this very collaborative way to make sure that it's developed. Because there's no one single point of truth in this regard. The truth only comes up when we all work together. And then the third is really keep developing and keep an eye on what's happening. Like a reminder, yes, we're talking about AI, but also this year is a year of quantum. So we already, need to start, we're also having a lot of activities on the quantum and making sure we're harnessing that. We power AI through quantum, so we also talk about other technologies like, for example, space, which is now having a huge revolution in terms of our connectivity and ability to deliver. So I think it's also very important that we not just take one technology as a holy grail, but we also look at the plethora of technologies and see how all of them can benefit humanity together. And I think doing that together is really the key. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes left to discuss looking ahead, the future. And we are really at a very unique time of history where we don't see only challenges, but of course, enormous opportunities to innovate and redirect the way that the digital cooperation is heading. So I would like to start with Chula to ask you, I mean, the GDC has a strong regional component. So I was wondering if you could say a few words, and I would appeal to you to be a bit brief so we can listen to everyone before we end. How we can land this regionally in Africa and what opportunities you see for the African continent.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very quickly. I think I need not spend too much time because the African continent has already moved forward. As a matter of fact, last year, the Africa Union rolled out the Africa Digital Compact itself. So as Africa, we are really looking ahead. I think there's great opportunity. I think it was highlighted by Amandeep, just the opportunity that Africa presents, both in terms of demographics, in terms of scope for investment. Also, the issue of partnerships becomes very important. I mean, GDC, where we are right now is very interesting because we have to see it percolate through different channels, its strands. I think Thomas was very clear to say that within the UN, it is actually percolating down to operations. We hear the private sector also taking it on. So even within the continent of Africa, we expect to see further collaboration with the different agencies of the UN. We expect to see private sector also picking it up. Already Microsoft, I think, is talking about connecting East Africa to Southern Africa through a cable. We hear from Nokia in Egypt and South Africa. So a lot of things are going on already. But at the country level, there has to be also the countries themselves have to develop implementation strategies. In the GDC, there's a commitment to support countries which seek to write out their strategies. There's one country I know, Zambia. It has already rolled out 2 strategies, one a digital strategy and the second one on AI. And Amandeep was very correct to say that in many cases, the digital economy is growing faster than GDC. Last year, Zambia had the worst drought in 40, 50 years, and we're expecting a recession, more or less, but we grew by 4%, mainly because the ICT sector grew 4 times as much, 16% somewhere there. And so there's great potential in Africa. We encourage you all to invest in Africa. That's the pitch. But on top of that, I think at the global level as well, there's work to be done. Here we need to collaborate across regions through group of friends. We have one taking place today. We need to collaborate on various platforms, FFD4, which Zambia is also co-facilitating, by the way. We need to make sure that we have space there to talk about the capacities. You talked about investments in digital and things of that nature across regions and within regions. So I'll leave it there for now, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chula. And Whitney, could you take us through the business perspective of the future?
Sure. I think one of the really important things about the GDC and the implementation, and really pleased to see the collaboration with ITU, and congratulations to ITU on 160 years. I think that's a model of an organization that adapts to really dramatic change. But, you know, almost every company now is a tech company. You know, you're either a tech creator or you're a tech user. That's from really micro enterprises all the way up. And so what we see as particularly useful, I think, is that the GDC is created in ways as a living document. And there's that ability to continue to review, because we know the pace of change isn't going to slow down. And particularly as we look at AI and AI implementation, you know, AI is a very energy-hungry technology. And I think the next frontier in many ways is deployment of AI that is less energy-intensive, so that, in fact, there is the ability to have it used and implemented really broadly across the globe in a way that brings benefit to populations, and even in areas where there are still some challenges in getting access to electricity. You really don't want that to be the key. I think what we would like to see is, in these discussions, is that business is a part of that, you know, is a part of that discussion across the board. Again, I speak for US business, but really we're thinking broadly across the board, because every kind of business has a use case to contribute.
Thank you very much. And before I let you go, I would like to end this discussion about asking each of you to, with one sentence, saying what you would like, what you expect to come out of the GDC in the next coming years. Well, if I can start with you and then go to Natasha, we'll do it this way.
Doubling down on digital infrastructure rollout, and really doubling, tripling down on responsible use of technology and skilling a wider population.
I'm excited to see the International Scientific Panel on AI stood up and synthesizing the science on AI in a way that's backed and supported by all 193 member states. I think that deep scientific understanding will help us really take advantage of this AI opportunity and stay ahead of the risks as well.
So I think, first of all, I think is that GDC for us is a booster engine for the digital across the world. So I think it's, and that's what we hope to really see. We hope to really GDC continue to shine the light on the need to address these barriers. We talk about them today, you know, from infrastructure to skills, also policy. I think is important to really double down on collaboration and to bring in that collaborative ethos across international cooperation. You know, I think digital era is really where multi-stakeholder system has shown it to work, and I think we need to continue on that, and really then to make sure that digital is also percolating across the UN system as a key tool of achieving the goals, our joint goals that we want to see, and help us in development as well.
Whitney.
Yeah, mine's a little bit personal, which is I would just love to see the GDC and the implementation process looking at use of AI, not to make jobs obsolete, but to help people do their jobs better and more thoroughly. So this really is looked at as an opportunity for growth and an opportunity for advancement.
Finally, just getting down to the core principles and objectives of the GDC. the 5 areas. Make sure that we're well connected, everybody's connected, close the $2.6 billion number of people are not connected. Let's be very clear about that. Making sure that everybody has the right to the digital world, ensuring that human rights are respected, ensuring that AI is advanced and the full potential of humankind is realized through the Global Digital Compact. We have to make sure that all the 3 pillars of the United Nations are key and that multilateralism remains succinct. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and fantastic. Thank you so much for your contributions. And I bring with me 2 things from this discussion. The first one is how important the success of the GDC is. We need all to work on that. And the second is that exactly that we need to work together. The collaboration between the stakeholders, different parts of society, in order to implement and to turn the commitments into action is really, really important. And I think that I'm very encouraged by what I've heard from all of you today. So thank you so much, and I think give them a big applause from the audience. And we leave 46 seconds before our actual time had expired. Thank you very much. Thomas, good to see you. Chula. Wow, thank you to all our panelists for the forward-looking, action-oriented remarks on implementation of global digital compacts. So I have a quick question for you all. This is for you and all of you who are watching us online. Those of you who use generative AI in your personal life, can you please stand up? Those of you who use generative AI in personal life. Okay. Wow, that also includes me. So thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. And I hope those online also did the same. So I'm excited to host and present the next conversation. Maybe just a little bit about me, just a little bit. So I'm the Chief of Information Management Unit for Department of Political Affairs, Peacebuilding Affairs, and Peace Operations. So what I do on a day-to-day basis is I help support our headquarters colleagues and our colleagues in the field missions, and I provide them advice on the use of emerging technologies aligned with UN 2.0. So we very much focus on use of data, use of generative AI responsibly, and we look into opportunities how we can help support the implementation of Security Council mandates by implementing the new emerging technology responsibly. So that's just for you to know. And we talked about children, which was really important, and huge thanks to Baroness Kato for that. But now let's talk about youth. The Global Digital Compact places an emphasis on inclusive innovation, youth engagement, and multi-stakeholder engagement. The Pact for the Future includes a second annex, the Declaration on Future Generations, which highlights the vital role of youth in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. To reflect this, we would like to welcome our youth representative, Carolina Rojas,
from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth to share a few words. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause for Carolina. Carolina, please. Thank you, Carolina. Over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts around engagement of youth in the implementation of Global Digital Compact?
Oh, thank you very much for the space. Again, I'm Carolina Rojas. I am a representative of the Major Group for Children and Youth. I hold the position as a technology focal point. And right now, I'm not here as a digital champion, but mostly as my messenger for digital champions. For the past 2 years, I've had the privilege to lead the UN Call for Innovations for the STI Forum that has grown interest in young innovators. So that this year we got almost 400 applicants, from which 60% were digital solutions or digital champions. So what this shows is that youth are not waiting for the systems to be already established or enabled. They are already taking action. The Secretary General in our common agenda said that our digital world right now is one of divides, but youth are proving every day that they can bridge that divide and that they are bringing solutions to bridge that divide. And just as examples from our call for innovations, I just want to point out two. We have Jean Davut, who is from Turkey, and she is the co-founder of Peace Therapist. And she has been building a tech-enabled platform that is AI-driven to provide mental health services to earthquake survivors. Up to this point, they have served more than 30,000 people worldwide. And another example I would like to highlight is Mariana Costa from Peru, who has been building a social enterprise called Laboratoria in Latin America that trains young women from low resource settings on digital skills, on coding and UX, and they are placing them in the digital economy. You can know more about them. They will be here during the STI Forum. They will be speaking at some of the plenary sessions, so I invite all of you to go and interact with them. But these are just examples. They are not exceptions. We have a lot of youth all over the world creating solutions for critical services where the systems are lacking. Even with systems lacking, young people are still pushing forward these agendas. But as today, having today as an action day, I want to highlight maybe 3 actions from our side. The primarily is that I can't stress enough the need for infrastructure, physical and digital, which has already been highlighted for meaningful continued participation. But as a mechanical engineer myself, I also want to call out the need for strengthening the expansion of how we're looking at water and energy services all around the ecosystem, especially with emerging technologies as AI and similar that we're seeing are requiring this as enablers. And for this, I would like to call member states and stakeholders to increase the participation of organizations such as those that are within the World Federation of Engineering Organizations that are also working towards upskilling engineers and technicians to be able to provide these services. And then as a second point is that the supply side is not the only thing we should be looking at. We should also be looking at the people and their skills. And I want to call for member states and stakeholders to commit to the Digital Sustainable Development Goals Capacity Network as established by the GDC that aims to train 1 million young people, or not young people, but digital champions by 2030. And then as a final action is that digital champions also need to be able to be seen as co-creators, so be more present in the governance side of the GDC, and then being considered as champions, but also as policy advocates. And then finally, I just want to say that, yes, there's still much to be done for infrastructure side to be able to reach more young people to meaningfully participate. But let's just not forget that young people are already participating, even with the limitations that we currently have, and they are already being meaningful architects in this space.
Thank you so much, Carolina. It's really wonderful to hear. It's wonderful to hear that youth are already championing and they're already part of this movement. So we have two engineers. I'm software engineer, you're mechanical engineer. I think we need to have our third engineer, our tech envoy, to join us for this conversation. Please, USG, join us. So, dear Tech Envoy, you just heard the reflections from the panel and also Carolina's excellent remarks. How do you see this perspective connecting with the implementation of the Global Digital Compact?
I think Carolina's words were very inspiring. So you've given us some homework in terms of implementation as well. So it's not only the connecting and the harnessing of digital technologies, but also participation in governance. You heard from the panel that there are these important processes underway. So the scientific panel, the AI scientific panel, where young scientists, young AI engineers, but also multidisciplinary experts would have an opportunity to shape the world's thinking, to bring more knowledge and information to everyone. Likewise, in the governance dialogue, which we hope would have a multi-stakeholder dimension. Of course, governments have the lead role. There again, there are opportunities for youth to engage. And finally, the third piece that is really critical this year, capacity building. So it's not only skills related to AI, data, but also access to infrastructure, compute, as we know, as engineers, without which there is no context-specific development, the kind of innovations that you mentioned. And very soon we'll go into the data panel, and we're very excited to bring that conversation, which started in Geneva, here to New York, because youth are generating, as Biban often says, youth are generating more than a third of the data, perhaps close to 40% now that we see today. And you can shape the digital future by shaping how and what kind of data is generated and how that is governed.
And remarks, and maybe just to add on the data aspect. So in my work in peace operations, political affairs, and peace building, in order to implement UN 2.0 vision on the area of data, we have established Peace and Security Data Hub. You can check it out on your phone, psdata.un.org. And the focus is very much to ensure that the data, reliable UN data, is readily and easily available to the public. In the world of misinformation, disinformation, it's more important to make sure us as United Nations ensure that the data around peace and security, around conflict, around peacekeeping deployment is publicly available to our member states, to researchers, to academia, to private sector, to have the right information. So, and I think that's an area that is also very much highlighted within the Global Digital Compact on how we need to ensure that we have the right, accurate data, because data fuels AI, and that would be the discussion that we will have in the next panel as well. But of course, there are challenges around the diversity in data collection, in terms of the geographic diversities, which member states are now providing us data, what are the member states who are falling behind, which, Carolina, very much goes back to your point around the infrastructure. and why infrastructure is so needed, as well as the skill set that was highlighted by previous panel, as well as by you and Tech Envoy as well.
Avishan, before we get to the next panel, I was thinking, we didn't have time earlier, maybe just for everyone to be able to visualize together how these various objectives of the GDC come together and how data comes into the AI governance discussion has to go along with that. So perhaps, if we have a moment, we can share some slides. There you go. So you have these 5 objectives of the GDC, where from the connectivity divide and the skills gap, and also the demand side, as Carolina, you mentioned, the demand pull through the DPIs, we go on to other important objectives, fostering safe digital spaces, protecting human rights, data governance, and AI governance. Now, how does this all come together? If we can go on to the next slide. To help us build the inclusive digital economy that we need to be able to deal with the constrained physical space and the demographic bulge. So the foundations really are the DPIs, the digital public infrastructure, that help us generate the data. There is data on the internet for training AI models. There's data that's sitting in proprietary data sets in companies, in government ministries, but then there is data that can be generated daily, and that can be scaled up through DPIs, the infrastructure around data, the governance around data, the skills component, and the policy and regulation. Those are essential foundations. But to be able to benefit from them, we need safety, security, and trust. We need protection for human rights, without which we cannot go further. And then there is the early harvest of digital applications, whether it's government services, e-commerce, fintech, or the combination of public and private sector effort in areas like public health, agriculture, the green transition. This everyone, every country can do, must be enabled to do. And then that leads to questions that the panel raised. How does international cooperation help? It can help entrepreneurs scale within regions. It can help us come up with common frameworks, regulatory frameworks, standards. And obviously, the national effort in building the innovation ecosystems, the capital markets, the scale-up capital for startups, that needs to go hand in hand with this international and regional enabling. This is what will lead to innovation that drives progress in the SDGs. And in the value chain, both on the hardware side and on the software side, there are opportunities for each and every country to build value within their own national economies and together with their neighbors in the regions and more broadly. We cannot get to Silicon Valley or the Hangzhou Digital Valley Corridor by copy and pasting. But if we build these foundations nicely, leverage data, digital public infrastructure, skills, and the right policy frameworks, then we create a space through which these national and regional champions can emerge. So with that, I just want to close and say a big thank you to my team, the team from the OSG, young team that has helped us put this together. Thank you to Avishan, to Carolina. Thank you to Ambassadors Elina Kalku and Ambassador Omar Hilal, Morocco and Finland, for helping us put this day together. Enjoy the last panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carolina. That was really insightful, really appreciated. Okay, so now as Tech Envoy highlighted, we are at our last panel, Governing Data for AI. So the last discussions that we had, the last panel that really showed the UN member states' commitment to an inclusive digital economy. But currently, the reality is that in some major data sets used to train artificial intelligence, over 80% of the data comes from North America and Western Europe. While entire regions like Africa contribute less than 3% of data, And I think that goes back to the discussion we had on infrastructure, on a skill set, and many other issues that our previous panelists highlighted. This lack of geographic and cultural diversity can lead to AI systems that don't understand or serve the needs of the majority of the world's population. And that's a serious problem. We need to make sure no one is left behind when designing AI models. So to guide the conversation, please welcome our distinguished moderator, Claire Melamed, CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Please join me in welcoming Claire. Claire, welcome.
Thank you very much
for joining us.
Thank you very, very much. And what a fascinating day it has been already. I hope that this final panel can pull together some of the threads that we've been hearing about. And also, you can be sure that we will remember this is an action day. And I will be asking the panel, so be warned, at the end what their action points are to take home with us. I loved the presentation that we heard at the beginning of the day about some of the likely economic consequences and trajectories of these new technologies that we are all enthusiastic users of, but also focused here today on how to make sure that they do good in the world. And in that context, I think, it's very clear why sometimes we talk about data. It's a slightly tired metaphor, but no one's found a better one yet, so we will continue to use it, that we think about data as the new oil. We saw really clearly this morning in those presentations the huge economic growth potential for the economy, for all kinds of disruptions, both good and bad, that data is powering. And let's not forget that underneath AI, underneath the digital tools, sits data, which is the fuel that is powering all of this. Now, we tended in the, perhaps, a few years ago when we talked about data as the new oil, it was a rather breathless, excited analogy that was meant to be very positive and exciting. I think, we are all increasingly in this world aware of some of the terrible and catastrophic consequences that we are now facing by using oil in this profligate, in the unregulated, in the thoughtless way that we have been using oil over the last 150 years, and the terrible damage that has wrought to some of the things that we care about most and to the lives that we want to lead. And as we start to think about what rules, what guardrails we should be putting around this new data-powered economy, let's remember the warning which is implicit in that analogy, as well as the potential, and think about how are we going to regulate data so that while it may be the new oil in the sense of powering the good things that have been brought to us, it's very definitely not the new oil in terms of taking us towards a new catastrophic future because we've done it without thought and without regard for the consequences that it may bring. That's where data governance comes in. That's the subject of this panel and the things that we want to talk about. How can we manage this precious new asset that we have in a way that brings us the good things that we want without imposing terrible new costs that I think we are only just beginning to think about. So to set the scene, and before I welcome the panel onto the stage, let me ask all of you where your starting point is. You're all producing data. Many of you are probably producing data right now on your phones as you're tweeting or whatever it is we call it now from this event, as you're texting your friends. Maybe you're taking the time to do a little bit of grocery shopping or whatever it is that we do. We're producing data all the time. I'd like to know, with a show of hands, how confident are you that that data that you are producing every minute of every day is doing good in the world? All kinds of organizations are taking that data, are using it, are turning it into algorithms, are turning it into products. Is that data doing the things that you want it to do? So let's have a show of hands. Apologies to all of you who are watching online. I'd love to know your views as well, but I think the technology is not going to let us yet. Those of you who are confident that your data is overall doing good in the world, put your hands up. Not so many. Those of you who think that maybe on balance there is damage being done by the way that data is being used in AI and in some of the applications that we see. So we have, I'm not surprised about this, to be honest, I probably would have put my hand up there too, a pessimistic view. It's funny how we can manage a sort of pessimism of the present with a real optimism, a pessimism of the present with an optimism of the future. We're here because we think things can be better, but we're also here because we know how far short we are today in that. So, to discuss how we can change that, how we can be back in a few years and ask that question again and find that people are confident that their data is going to be used well because of the rules that we've set down, because of the data governance guardrails that have been set around these new technologies, let me welcome the panel, please, onto the stage. Let me welcome Bruno Bioni, who is the founder of Data Privacy Brazil, Alison Gilwald, the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa, Peter Major, the Vice Chair of the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development, and Mr. Abdul Raham Habib, the Vice President of the Strategy Management Office at the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority. Thank you to all of you. Now, you heard that our colleagues here in the room, and I expect probably those watching online, need some reassurance from us. They need to know that we, at least on this stage, have some ideas for how to make this better. So let me start by asking all of you, what do you think is the single most pressing governance challenge that we face in governing data in ways that will unlock the value for AI and for other applications, but do that in a way that reassures people that it's being done well, that protects human rights, that embodies the values that we want to see in the systems that we are developing. Bruno, let me start with you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think at the macro level, we are lacking a more technical, social dynamic approach, so it's avoiding us to shift from an individual perspective to a more collective perspective. And at the micro level, I think the lacking of data quality, because it's furthering not only discrimination, but also makes even more vulnerable groups invisible to the data sets and also the optimization process. And the nexus between those two elements at the macro and micro level, the lacking of data, metadata and paradata to measure accountability in those flows. So those are the three main pressuring issues that I would like to pose.
Thank you very much. Alison, what would your answer be to that?
Thank you, Claire. I think the biggest challenge is actually ensuring that people experience benefits from these technologies being applied. And I think a major challenge to that is that the majority of the world, certainly the majority of Africans, have no knowledge or experience or awareness of how it is being used or not being used, or how they might benefit from it. So I think we've got some really foundational challenges around inclusion and digital equality and inclusion and data justice, around the digitization of people's lives in Africa, in the Global South more generally, so that it is reflected in these data sets, that people can see the benefits associated with this. And then I think the real challenges around the existing status quo and the inequities that are around, associated with it, are the inabilities to enforce any regulations that we know need to be taken in place. So, just to address the issue of, oil as data as oil, I think it's really important that it's understood that, that data isn't a finite resource. The data is a public good, and it needs to be regulated as such. And that is actually its value. That is its strategic value, is that it's non-rivalrous, that it can be used again, and that we need to regulate it so that people are able to do that in a more equitable way, and so that the benefits are there for all.
Thank you. Peter, as the chair of the UN's Working Group on Data Governance, this is officially your job. So tell us the first thing you think that we should be doing.
Well, I think we have to speak the common language. When we talk about data and data governance, probably each and every one of us are thinking something different. So to me, one of the most important things that we should come to a common understanding what we are talking about. And that would be the first step towards regulation, towards governance, towards a better understanding what we are doing. And we have to be clear about it. Data was always important. I just recall the time when I was a physicist, particle physicist, and we have been dealing with data. And it was absolutely interesting. But data has come into every sphere, every sector of the economy. So it's really important aspects came into being. So to me, it's really important to have a common understanding. And since we are in the very beginning of a long journey, I believe that we have to put down the fundamentals in this aspect. And we have to be, if you let me continue, we have to be extremely careful not to build new divides. And these divides, which has been already mentioned, it may be an age divide, it may be an educational divide, it may be a geographical divide, and so on. You know what I'm talking about. So we have to be extremely careful about it.
You, please.
I'll take an optimistic view in this. I believe data regulation and the data governance is quite there for quite some time in multiple fields. But what's happening with AI, it's taking us to another level. And we are talking now data in use with AI, not data by itself. Therefore, what's important is, yes, regulation, but what's more important is the capacity building for people to understand, as Peter mentioned, to understand what are we talking about and how can that reflect in the data management and the data governance practices. Many governments already have done a good job into data governance for quite some time now, for years. What's remaining now is to update that into the AI world today. And going back to your point with the comparison with the oil, now you cannot use oil while it's in the transfer. You cannot use oil in different situations, but you can actually use data while it's in the transfer. You can analyze it on the fly. You can also analyze multiple data points, while that does not happen with oil. Therefore, even the regulation and the talk about all this need to be informed, and people need to understand how that happens and how this type of regulation could happen. Then also, what's the impact? I think many of us think about the impact on our privacy and our security and so on. But what data is used and what is it used for and in what form, and can it be traced and back to you? And is it happening even by big companies or others?
Thank you. No, and I agree with you about the limitations of the analogy. I always feel somewhat conflicted using it because it's so useful to make the point. And yes, as you say, I think some of the challenges that we have with data governance are also rooted in our reliance on analogies that think about trade in products and not about, as you say, the sort of intangibles that we see with data. So I think it's useful, but it only takes you so far. So as we start the discussion about data governance within the new working group and think about the international dimension, as we do, of course, here in the United Nations. Of course, we're not starting from scratch. We're building on a number of existing national, sometimes even subnational innovations in data governance. So I'd like to perhaps start with you, Bruno, to just talk a little bit, there have been many interesting experiments with data governance in Brazil, of course, and across Latin America. So I wonder, how do you think that global frameworks, like the one that we are talking about today, can be most useful in supporting national regimes and the efforts of governments and communities inside countries in trying to make sure that the data is doing good, to come back to the original question?
Thank you, Claire. So as Peter highlighted before, and I think Latin America, but also Global South, has a lot of to be shared. What would be like the common language for people to take agency over data? And there in Latin America and also in the Global South, there are numerous examples of what being called a data generation citizenship. What it means that the population, the community, could generate data in order to defend the territory, for instance, indigenous people or a fisher community, to monitor how sustainable is or not the environmental in that issue, or such as in Brazil, in favelas, to the poor people, demand the government to make the infrastructure more resilient or not in order to address climate change. So that's talk about and is connected with the previous comments that I did. That's a good example how from the micro level we could see a social technical approach in terms of governance. The people is the pillar of the governance. The community is the pillar of the governance. And also from the micro level, it's marvelous in terms of data quality, because people is refining the data sets from the ground. So that kind of examples, and the Global South here, I think, is leading those kind of aspiring initiatives, should be triggered and should be accelerated, of course, by public investment, but as Amandapi showed us, by having public infrastructures, digital public infrastructures, and mainly capacity building of escalating those initiatives from data literacy, mainly, I would say.
Thank you. And Abdurrahman, you lead the Saudi Data and Artificial Intelligence Authority. So you're also living this reality of national systems and here thinking about global systems. How do you see the articulation between the two in the Saudi context?
I'll build on Bruno, I think, comments. Today, capacity building is one of the core that government, especially the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is working on. For the past couple of years, we trained more than 1.5 million trainees in data and AI in the past couple of years. And the number is just growing. And we are taking that even to the global level through the International Center for AI with the UNESCO to train 25,000 women in the next couple of years in AI. We already did batch 1, and we are hopefully announcing batch 2, and many other programs within the kingdom in capacity building in specific, because as I think Peter mentioned earlier, we need to have the common language. We need to know what we are talking about. Regulations are happening. We have the personal data protection law and multiple other policies in place in the kingdom, but also we're playing a quiet role in the Digital Compact, for example. We hosted an early discussion in 2020 for the Digital Compact, and we're hosting multiple groups over the past couple of years in these topics in order to reach to that point. We also think, as Bruno mentioned earlier, about the community. So we worked with ISISCO and the Islamic Charter for AI, which focuses in a big part on protecting culture and religions in terms of AI and the data that's being generated and how is it used within the community. So a lot of work that's happening today from multiple agencies, and I think governments, especially in Saudi Arabia, who had one of the leading organizations like Saudi Data and AI Authority, focuses on and building this community and building these projects and working with the international society in order to define and make use of these policies on the global level and on the national level.
Thank you so much. And Alison, if I can come to you, you have led work in the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence on data justice, and I know you're also heavily involved in these debates in the G20. As Peter said, we need to start talking about a common language. How do you think the concept of data justice helps us here? And how does it help to move us towards the kind of outcomes that we want to see?
Thanks very much, Claire. So I think there's sort of three main points that data justice work, particularly the work we did in the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, but also that imbued the African Union data policy framework, in fact, and has affected the continental policy. And it's really at looking at issues of the very uneven distribution of the impact of harms, and also, very importantly, I think it's the important contribution that came out of this, because there had already been data justice work that was concerned with the realization of human rights in data protection mainly, but data governance work. And so you got that work that was done on data stewardship, alternative data stewardship, data trusts, and those kinds of things. Because obviously, the global application, the Brussels effect of the GDPR, had little impact on communities that were notions of informed consent, have little impact on communities that are not literate, not able to, we can barely sign off on those things. So those kinds of things. So it extended those notion of human rights, but I think very importantly, so that they could be realized by people who were exercising them. But I think importantly, it also raised the issue of the very uneven distribution of opportunities that are associated with these advanced data-driven technologies, and the increasing, asymmetry in power relations and profits and things that are going in concentration in markets that is going on. And so the data justice approach to data governance for AI specifically looked at the kind of extension of the dominant discourse, which was essentially a responsible and ethical AI. It was a self-governing, a self-regulatory conception that if you could get firms to behave in a certain way, then you would produce these outcomes in a way that doesn't acknowledge these negative multipliers that you've spoken about associated with data. And I think that that important part of that was we see in the regulation that's emerged within the European Union and those sorts of things that are adopting that. I think less attention has been paid in regulation and in policy to ensuring that those rights are enforced in people's daily lives, and that also the enforcement of human rights is not only for the first generation rights, which are, widely expressed and there's kind of normative things on them, but also very importantly on second and third generation rights. And that really is what redresses those inequalities of opportunities and of harms in a global context. So the economic rights and environmental rights. And it really goes again to the point of treating data as a public good. And just probably very finally to say that I think the important thing about the data justice debate is going back to this intractable, wicked, policy problem we have of the digital equality paradox, which underlies the GDC and the realization that, simply layering advanced technologies over existing structural inequalities is simply amplifying those. And I think, that wicked problem we still are having enormous trouble addressing. And just to link it to the previous panel, we are unable to address these until we seriously address these structural inequalities that we know are perpetuating these inequalities, which is, of course, a big human development challenge. People have spoken about the digital divide. People have spoken about the infrastructural challenges that are there. But we know from the limited data we have, and this is actually a critical point linking the different parts of the GDC, is that the GDC does mention the importance of data, the collection of public data, digital statistics, and it does mention the importance of regulating those for the purposes of AI. But people move very quickly on from that. So in terms of financial commitments to addressing these problems, it shifted the focus from digital inequality to the AI need, the need for capacity building and funding, and of course on infrastructure. Whereas we know from the data that the primary problems with digital inclusion, I'm talking about fundamental inclusion, not hypercompute power and various other things, is not infrastructural. It's actually on the demand side. There is 100% coverage in many countries, 99, 95% of coverage in many countries, but we don't have, we have internet access levels of much lower than the 20% that was quoted for where you get those positive effects in growth. So we have to address these basic fundamental data problems, because until we do, those people are never going to appear in these giant data sets that are used to make millions of decisions, automated decisions every day. They're simply not going to be reflected in it. You can't unbias those data sets that are these very powerful information deciding outcomes that operate globally. And just to say last point, because I can see I've run on, is that Mabebe Behani's fantastic audits of these demonstrate that without massive digital inclusion, digitization of people's lives across the continent, what you see is the perpetuation of historical injustices, of the exclusion of the vast majority of Africans, the underrepresentation of people at intersections of different kinds of inequality, discrimination in the use of these data sets, etc. This is really a massive regulatory challenge for us to address.
Thank you. Peter, I'm slightly coming back to your first point about the fact that, each of us on the panel has come at this question from a very different perspective in terms of identifying different, equally critical, but different aspects of this challenge, whether we're starting from the community level, whether we're starting from the infrastructure level, whether we're starting from the question of national regulations, whether we're starting from the question of exclusion or sometimes the terms on which inclusion happens in data sets and so on. So clearly the working group has a very big task to do across a very, very broad agenda. As well as being the chair of the working group on data governance, you're also vice chair of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development overall. So given your experience in the Commission, what's your advice to us sitting around the room who are members of that working group, including yourself, of course, around how can we best sort of disentangle this problem that we have been confronted with and turn it, as the theme of our day suggests, into action?
Well, I'm tempted just to say that who am I to give advice? On a more serious tone, we are lucky. The working group is a multi-stakeholder working group. And we know from experience now, well, as far as I'm concerned, I have been leading 3 working groups, which were all multi-stakeholder working groups. And this one on data governance seems to be one of the best, if not the best. The members of the working group are very knowledgeable. They know their tasks, and they bring different aspects of data governance. And I'm really very happy because I'm learning a lot from the members themselves. And it seems to me that even though half of the working group is made up of representatives from governments, the other half are representing different stakeholders. And in addition to that, the working group is open and inclusive. Open means that observers can be in the room and can take the floor and can contribute. The first meeting that we had was a hybrid meeting where online participants could also take the floor and contribute. And I was a bit surprised having some reactions that it is too inclusive, meaning that there are so many contributions that people get a bit confused. Who is contributing what? And I am really happy that there is such an interest in this topic. And it shows something that, well, this is an important topic, and I hope that we are up to the expectations. So I would like to emphasize again, it should be a bottom-up working group, it should be a multi-stakeholder working group, and it should bring all the aspects of the data governance on the table, and that is the way to go ahead. So I hope we can come up with some good results. The time is very short. We have to report by the 81st session of the General Assembly. The only thing I can say, I try my best, and I'm sure all the members will try their best.
Thank you so much. Okay, I have one more general question that I would like to ask all of you, and then if we have time, we'll do a quick fire round on action points. One of the benefits of having a global governance framework, if and when we can get to that point, is going to be increased interoperability. That will have a framework that can enable cross-border data flows and the kind of innovation and progress that can come for that. At the moment, as we heard, we have a very diverse regulatory environment at very, very different levels, and this is obviously inevitable and wholly desirable. Context is all. But we need to, as we think about the global framework, think about how can we create an interoperable data governance framework that enables, that doesn't stifle innovation, development, but that also respects some of the principles that we've been hearing today, that we heard so strongly in the working group around data sovereignty, around protecting the rights of communities. How can we square that circle on interoperability? Seems to me one of the key questions that we're going to be grappling with as we go through this process. And I'd love to hear your perspectives on that. So perhaps let's start with you, Bruno.
Yeah, so just a quick footnote. I think it's important to mention, to highlight that interoperability is not the same of copy and paste. So is it possible to have interoperable mechanisms, legal frameworks with some difference, taking into account the context in which the laws will be enforced, which is the point that was made by Alison. The second one, coordination and also harmonization is not like different than having, or is not the opposite than having decentralization enforcement. I think it is also important to take in mind. Why I'm saying this? Because right now, one of the big elephants in the room about data governance is how we are going to connect three pieces of regulation. Antitrust, competition is a big issue. We are not going to have sovereignty in our countries in the global south without having a barrier of entries that is going to be broken. The second one is the full implementation of data protection laws. They were made 100 years ago. For instance, data portability, which is a new right. Who is going to exercise this right now without having interoperability foundation between mechanisms, which is the point that was made by Alison. We have to have in mind that a collective enforcement, a collective rights should be followed by individual rights, in the sense that data portability is just the starting point by individual doing by itself or themselves, and is not going to be a material right, exercisable right, without having interoperability mechanisms. And last but not least, I think when we are seeing those developments regulatory in different regions, I would say that the Brazilian regulatory proposal is very interesting, because we are creating the so-called Brazilian government's regulation ecosystem. So we are going to have a decentralized approach. So the financial bank is going to be the regulator in AI for the financial sector. The telecom regulation is going to be the AI regulator for telecom sector. And then a new entity will have the role to coordinate it, because the ethics of data governance, the regulation, the hard regulation it's well already established, but we have to have a new grammar, a new tools to enforce this in those sectors that are going to be affected by a transversal technology such as AI and data.
Thank you. Alison.
Thank you. I think this is a really critical part of the Global Digital Compact, and I fear that there's been some conflation between interoperability from a technical and standards point of view, which we absolutely need, but also has implications, and the kind of harmonized global governance frameworks that we need, kind of rights-based frameworks and things that we need. And I think both are very important, and I think it sort of goes to the point that was made earlier, in the earlier panel, about distinguishing policy and standards. They go together. And I think it's going to be absolutely critical for us not only to be able to benefit from a digital and AI general purpose economy, to have that kind of interoperability. I think it's important that it's, I think it's really an important opportunity at the regional level. So for example, in Africa, in the African Data Policy Framework, we already have a harmonized framework, commitments to common data standards that would allow for interoperability, to allow for the Continental Free Trade Area and those sorts of things. So that's simply a regional application of something that ideally you would want to be able to happen at the global level. Why it's important that it's managed, that it's controlled locally first or regionally first, because I think there are regional benefits that you can't achieve at the national level, especially with many of our small economies. You can get the economies of scale and scope to be a meaningful market that people have to take more seriously and engage in that, and would allow for that interoperability. But the problem there is also that we are immediately being tied into global standards and norms, for example, around trade, around intellectual property, and these kinds of things that have not benefited us historically. And so you get this fantastic opportunity of a digital single market in Africa, data policy, harmonized data policy framework, interoperability framework for the African Continental Free Trade Area, and then we introduce digital protocols that are taken directly from the WTO and completely undermine all the efforts around preferential access to markets for local people, data access markets, et cetera, and those kinds of things. So if we simply apply international free flow of data, and interoperability without addressing the existing unequal flows that there currently are, we're simply going to perpetuate the status quo and the asymmetries of power and information that are currently there.
Thank you. Maybe I'll ask Abdul Rahman first and then come back to you at the end, Peter, for the working group perspective.
I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia were lucky to predict the work that's going to happen with data and AI. So starting with a strategy in 2019 and the creation of the Saudi Data and AI Authority to be a single entity that, very similar to what Bruno said, oversee and manage regulation and incentives in the programs for data and AI. And putting them together also give an advantage of combining those regulation and making sure those regulation works together. We're also working with, in that strategy, our main goal is adoption. And I heard that today and multiple times in different occasions that if you come to Saudi, you will see the enthusiasm, especially within the kingdom, all over, from youth and older generation, into the adoption of AI. And that's our strategy, to adopt AI, to leapfrog to the future as well. Therefore, also our regulation is taking a different shape. So we're working very hard with standards and approving and working with different standard organizations to have those standards available, which work with the interoperabilities in the future. Regulation is there. Certain regulations are hard regulation, but also this is a moving target. So AI is not done yet, and we're just at the beginning, maybe. Therefore, regulation is working into incentives program to compliance rather than just putting a law and asking people to comply to that law. And maybe to Bruno's notes earlier, some of those laws are really old. Even if you have a law today, it will become maybe old or it did not count for certain things later in the future. Therefore, we developed digital badges, for example, to give an incentive on AI products for compliance with AI ethics. And similar other programs with data sharing and data sharing policies that meant to be for AI governance in the near future. And once those mature enough, then it becomes a law or become a general policy. And at the end, we are looking from a national perspective maybe later on a regional perspective with ICARE and publishing this information, and hopefully sharing this advancement or the work that we have done in Saudi with the global community so others can benefit from the same advancement.
Thank you. Okay, Peter. Interoperability, data sovereignty, inequality.
Well, just building on what I've heard, it seems to me that whatever result we come up with, it will be a temporary result. And I know from experience, just referring, for instance, to the radio regulations of the ITU, it's a work in progress. It's being updated in every 4 years. So probably with the advances of technology and legal frameworks and e-economy and all the aspects, we can come up with a kind of reflection of the instant, of that moment we are in. But we have to be careful because it's going to be a very dynamic regulation, and we should already think about how to cope with that. So I believe the working group can provide some kind of framework which may be valid at that certain point, but the working group should continue either in this form or in different forms. We have to discuss that, to work on the updating of this framework. And it will be even bigger task than, for instance, updating the radio regulations. It's, to me, radio regulations, which is a very complex, it's a 4-volume regulations, if you want to know. Compared to whatever we're doing now, it seems to be the radio regulations is relatively simple. So data governance is going to be something enormous.
Thank you. Yes, this is a very different way of thinking about regulation, not as a sort of line, but as a continuous wave or a process. So thank you very much to the panel. Before I thank you, I just want to ask all of you in the audience, as you've been hearing, have you heard anything that makes you feel even a bit confident that this process, that the work that I'm sure many of you in the room are also involved in over time will mean that, say we're all sitting in this room in 5 or 10 years' time, that we will be able to be more confident that the data that we're producing from whatever technology we have in our pockets then will be used to do good in the world? Can I have a show of hands as to whether people feel a little bit more confident now? There you go, you see, you did a great job. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And that is the end of the panel. Thank you very much to our panelists and our excellent moderators. So the panel reminded us that while data is often called the new oil, we must remember that like oil, it must be refined to be valuable, governed to prevent misuse, and equitably shared to avoid deepening digital divide. So now I would like to introduce our last speaker, Ambassador Ka, Permanent Representative of the Gambia to the United Nations Office at Geneva, Chair of Commission on Science and Technology Development, and Vice Chair of Working Group on Data Governance, responsible data governance for member states. Thank you very much. Please welcome Ambassador Ka.
Good afternoon. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues, and friends. I think we've just had a very insightful and brilliant intervention from our panelists. As we conclude today's critical discussion on global data and AI in the digital economy, I am struck by both the urgency, the challenges, and the opportunities before us as outlined by the panelists. The intersection of shifting geopolitics, rapid technological advancements, and the pressing needs of the global South, particularly Africa, and broadly our collective global community, demands nothing less than a reimagined approach, one rooted, as we heard from the panelists, in equity, in collaboration, in development, prosperity, and foresight. Our dialogue has illuminated the transformative potential of data and AI in reshaping the global economy, while also underscoring the urgent need to address the challenges posed by shifting geopolitics and the unique requirements of the global South, particularly Africa. The digital economy is no longer a distant vision. It is already here, driving innovation, connectivity, and opportunities, as well as prosperity. Yet, as we've heard from the panelists, the benefits are certainly not evenly distributed. The global South, particularly in Africa, faces persistent barriers, particularly as outlined by the panelists, very, very limited infrastructure, unequal access to technology, and underrepresentation in global data and AI governance, which our working group, as Peter has mentioned, the working group on data governance, managed to have diverse voice from all regions of the world in the member state representative as well as in non-member states. So we are hopeful that the inclusive voices that are put together will begin to correct the underrepresentation of the voices from the South, particularly Africa. These are not mere technical challenges, I submit, but issues of equity, sovereignty, and justice, as again Peter mentioned, the importance of our mindfulness on data justice and the risking data colonization. In the context of shifting geopolitics, we must recognize that data is power, it is control, and it is competitiveness. The control of data, particularly data flows, AI algorithms, and digital infrastructure, shapes economic and political destinies. The global South, particularly Africa, must not be left on the margins of all conversations related to data and AI governance. It must be at the center because majority of humanity resides in the global South. To reimagine a truly inclusive global digital economy, we must prioritize, as I've heard from the panelists, capacity building, which means we must invest in digital literacy, skills, and infrastructure in the global South to meaningfully and truly bridge the digital divide. 2, we must also ensure that governance is inclusive and mindful. We must ensure that the global South has a seat at the table in shaping AI and data policies, fostering trust and accountability. Without it, we will create a challenge in front of us. I also had our panelists mention ethical AI. We must ensure, I submit that we must ensure we develop frameworks that respect our cultural diversity, as was mentioned by one of the panelists. We must protect human rights, and we must embrace a human-centric approach and prevent exploitation in our efforts. We must also make sure that there is meaningful and mutually beneficial partnerships, not just partnerships for the sake of partnerships that are cosmetic or sugar-coated. We must strengthen the North-South and South-South collaboration to truly and meaningfully share knowledge, create knowledge together, resources, and innovation. Some of the key takeaways that I will leave you with, let me highlight 3 key pivotal themes from what I gather from our collective discussion today by the panelists. I gather that digital technologies or digital economy is no longer just a technical or economic issue. I think we have to be very clear about that. It is indeed a geopolitical one, and I submit that. Data flows, AI governance, and infrastructure investments are increasingly shaped by strategic competition. Yet we must ensure this does not come at our cost or at the cost of fragmentation or exclusion or exploitation. We are very worried about that, and we must ensure that all our efforts de-risk that expectation and bring trust in our efforts. The imperative of inclusion, the global South, specifically Africa, cannot remain an afterthought or a footnote in the AI and data discourse or revolution. We had compelling calls for capacity building, fairer data governance, and technology transfer to truly and meaningfully bridge the digital divides in these areas. We must act on them, and for them not to be mere rhetoric. Multilateralism and stakeholderism must be reimagined. A fractured world cannot solve these challenges alone. We need to renew multilateral frameworks through meaningful collaborations with all stakeholders, whether it is in AI ethics, whether it is in human-centric and human rights approaches, or whether it is in cross-border data rules, whether it is on data stewardship or data sovereignty and self-determination, or data justice, or our efforts to de-risk data colonization, financing for digital public goods, and digital public infrastructure, we must together establish the guardrails, the norms for public interest that prioritize solidarity over a zero-sum competition. I call for an action for us to move forward. I urge 3 commitments. 1, our efforts from principles to meaningful and adaptive practices. Let's translate all these high-level AI and data governance principles into meaningful and adaptable, actionable policies, particularly for our most vulnerable economies and communities and the Global South. The United Nations Global Digital Compact, I submit, must be a vehicle for this and requires all of our collective optimism and efforts to action them, to operationalize them. 2, innovative, impactful, and sustainable investment in the Global South Agency, which means that not just access to technology. We want more than access. We want ownership to support our local growing and evolving AI ecosystem, to enable them and facilitate for them to build productive capacities and not just at the consuming continuum. Data literacy and startups to ensure innovation is by and for the South. I think this is very important as we move forward. Lastly, constructive and meaningful dialogue with inclusive and diverse voices over division. In our world today of competing tech blocks, political blocks, we must sustain inclusive forums such as this one that is being wonderfully and brilliantly organized, one that will help all of us to find common grounds on standards, on security, and on human-centric and human rights approaches. Our efforts will not be cheap. I know we are in times of budgetary issues and challenges, but our efforts requires investment to put teeth and substance and meaningfulness to our efforts. Not only saying that we need digital infrastructure, we must invest in that, but more importantly, we must invest in people, in skills, in research, and in local adaptive innovative ecosystem. So it calls for meaningful, reliable partnerships based on mutual respect and shared benefits, and to adhere to global norms that reflect our collective diversity, fairness, and the voice of all regions. I have some final reflections. One is ECOSOC stands as a beacon of multilateralism. We must leverage this platform to advocate for a digital economy that empowers all nations, leaving no member state behind. The stakes are huge, but also so is our collective resolve. But I believe together we can build a future where data and AI will serve a tool for shared prosperity and not division. The digital economy we build today will shape and enable development, power, and equality for decades. There was something I've heard earlier, which is this issue of data as oil. I will leave you with some provocative thoughts on that. I must say the data as the new oil analogy tends to oversimplify and often misrepresents the true nature of data. And here is some perspectives I will share. And I provoke, and I will say, data is not the new oil. And I meant that sincerely. It's more like sunlight or water, an abundant, renewable resource whose value truly depends on how it is collected, how it is shared, how it is interpreted, and how it is governed. So data is not rivalrous. Using it doesn't deplete it. It gains value through context and analysis and not consumption like oil. It can empower or oppress depending on governance, access, and intent. If misused, it has huge ethical implications, particularly around privacy, bias, and surveillance. Therefore, we need all voices in our efforts for a global data governance that may not be optimal, but close to optimality for the greater good, for the greater public interest. I must thank you once again and thank the brilliant panelists, the ECOSOC leadership, and ODET, and all of you for engaging us on this vital conversation. Let's continue to collaborate, to innovate, and to reimagine not just the future of data and AI, but the future that we all want. And we can only do that through our constructive and meaningful engagement where we actively listen to all voices. No one has the monopoly of ideas or what is right for the world. I believe that together, particularly if we listen to those who are at the other continuum, who do not yet have the capacity or the infrastructure or the know-how, it doesn't mean that they are not capable or incompetent to do so. And it will be a mutually beneficial partnership if all these voices come together. It will be a win-win for the global community. And I thank you all for this wonderful.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your excellent remarks. Really appreciate it. Please, please. Thank you, thank you. Wow, that was excellent remarks. So we are about to end the session, but let's do a quick recap. I know you all must be hungry at this 1 p.m. time. So what did we learn today? Inclusion must be designed, not assumed. And I very much believe in this one. Being a woman in tech from Middle East, I very much believe that no one must be left behind. We should bridge the digital divide, as Ambassador Ka also highlighted in his remarks. Second point, good data governance enables equitable innovation. I love the conversation around data is the new oil, or data is not the new oil. But one thing that is really important that we all need to keep in mind, that we need a governance around data. We need to ensure interoperability. We need to make sure that the systems that we design are interoperable between nations, between countries, so data can be used for good. And the third item is trust. Trust is the foundation of a safe and open digital future. Trust relies on transparency, accountability, and human rights-based safeguards across AI and digital platforms. So as we come to close of today's Action Day, I extend, together with my colleagues, we extend our sincere thanks to all speakers, to all moderators, and participants who contributed to a powerful day of dialogue, ideas, momentum, and to you all in person, in New York, and all of you who are watching us online from across the world. Please carry today's momentum forward in your own communities and institutions. Thank you all.